They were standing on my land when I found them. 5 men with surveying equipment, measuring tape stretched across the soil my father had worked for 50 years. No permission, no warning, just trespassing in broad daylight like they owned the place. I stepped onto the porch with my grandfather's shotgun in my hands, and everything went quiet. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from right now, because this story is about to show you exactly what happens when an HOA thinks they can take whatever they want. The man in the suit smiled at me, like I was the one who did not belong here. That smile cost him everything. The morning had started like any other. Coffee at 6. A walk along the eastern fence line by 6:30. I had done this routine for 23 years, ever since my father passed and left me this land. 5 acres of Texas soil that had been in the Cook family since 1962. My father worked it. His father cleared it, and I swore to protect it. So when I saw the white pickup trucks parked along my property line and 5 strangers setting up surveying equipment on my land, I did not panic. I assessed. 2 men holding poles, one operating the transit level, one is taking notes, and one in a gray suit standing back, watching like he was already calculating the profit. I walked back to the house without rushing, took my grandfather's shotgun down from above the fireplace. It had never been fired in anger, and I intended to keep it that way. But in Texas, a man standing on his own property with a legally owned firearm sends a message that words alone cannot deliver. I stepped onto the porch, racked a shell into the chamber loud enough for them to hear, and waited. The sound carried across the morning air like a period at the end of a sentence. Every head turned. Every movement stopped. The man in the suit looked up from his clipboard and squinted at me, like I was an inconvenience he had not anticipated. "You are on private property," I said. My voice was calm, factual. "This land does not belong to Oak Ridge Estates. It never has. You have 30 seconds to pack your equipment and leave." The workers looked at each other, uncertain, but the man in the suit started walking toward me, hands raised slightly, that same smile plastered across his face. He stopped about 20 feet from my porch, close enough to talk, far enough to feel safe. "Mr. Cook, I presume," he said. "I am Bradley Harmon, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I think there has been a misunderstanding." I did not lower the shotgun. "No misunderstanding. You are trespassing." Bradley Harmon tilted his head like a man explaining something to a child. "According to our records, this parcel falls within the boundaries of our community development. That means it is subject to HOA jurisdiction. We are simply conducting a routine survey to assess compliance." I kept my eyes fixed on his. "Your records are wrong. My family has owned this land since before your development existed. I have the deed, I have the original plat map, and I have a shotgun. Which one would you like to discuss first?" His smile flickered, just for a second. Then it came back, harder this time. "Mr. Cook, I strongly advise you to put that weapon down. Threatening an HOA representative is a serious matter. We have lawyers. We have connections with the county. If you want to make this difficult, we can make it very difficult for you." I let his words hang in the air for a moment. Then I spoke slowly, clearly, so there would be no confusion. "This is not a threat, Mr. Harmon. This is a fact. You are standing on my land without permission, under Texas law. I have the right to defend my property. I am asking you to leave. I will not ask again." The workers were already packing up, folding tripods, and gathering equipment before I finished speaking. They knew the law even if their boss pretended not to. Bradley Harmon stood frozen for another 5 seconds, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating. Then he turned and walked back to his truck without another word. The convoy pulled away in a cloud of dust, and I watched until the last vehicle disappeared around the bend. Only then did I lower the shotgun. I should have gone back inside, made another cup of coffee, let the adrenaline fade. But something gnawed at me. The way Bradley had smiled when he mentioned the survey, the way his crew had positioned their equipment was not along the property line, but inside it. These were not men measuring a boundary. These were men who had already decided where the new boundary would be. I set the shotgun on the porch rail and started walking the fence line, checking every post, every marker. My father had placed iron stakes at each corner of our property in 1971, driven deep into the ground and marked with orange paint. I knew their positions the way I knew my own heartbeat. The first stake was exactly where it should be. The second one. 2. The eastern markers stood untouched, rusting quietly in the soil where they had been for over 50 years. By the time I reached the southwest corner, I had almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. Then I saw it. Or rather, I saw the absence of it. The stake was gone, not broken off, not fallen over from the weather or age. Gone. A small hole remained where it had been pulled from the earth. The dirt around it fresh and dark. I searched the area systematically, walking in expanding circles, until I found it 15 feet further into my property, barely visible in the tall grass. The orange paint was faded, but unmistakable. Someone had moved it, recently, deliberately. This was not a survey. This was theft in slow motion, an inch at a time, hoping I would not notice until it was too late. I stood there for a long time, staring at that displaced marker, and I heard my father's voice in my head as clear as the day he said it. "Robert, never let anyone move the boundary. Once you lose the line, you lose everything." I picked up the stake and carried it back to its original position. But I did not drive it into the ground. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and we needed proof. 3 days passed. I spent them documenting everything. Photographed the displaced stake with GPS coordinates time-stamped on my phone. Measured the exact distance from the original hole to where I found it. Collected soil samples in sealed bags with dates in permanent marker. Old habits from my military days. Evidence means nothing if you cannot prove when and where you gathered it. I was building a file, preparing for a fight I hoped would never come. Then the envelope arrived, and I knew hope had left the building. The letter came by certified mail on a Thursday afternoon. Heavy cardstock, the kind that announces its own importance. The return address read, Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and the signature at the bottom belonged to someone named Donna Wood. Board secretary. I read it twice at the kitchen table, letting the audacity sink in before I allowed myself to react. According to this document, my property had been assessed and found in violation of 17 separate HOA regulations. The list included unauthorized structures, improper setback distances, visual obstructions, and storage of non-compliant equipment. The total fines assessed came to $100,000, payable within 30 days. $100,000 for violations on land that did not fall under their jurisdiction. They were not expecting me to pay. They were expecting me to bleed money on lawyers until I had nothing left but a piece of paper that said I was right, and an empty bank account that said I had lost anyway. Then Bradley Harmon would appear with an offer just low enough to feel like a rescue. I had seen this tactic before. Surround the target, cut off resources, wait for surrender. The only difference was that this siege came wrapped in legal letterhead instead of barbed wire. I called the county recorder's office that afternoon. 22 minutes on hold before a clerk finally answered. I explained that I needed access to the original property records for my parcel, including the plat map and any annexation agreements related to Oak Ridge Estates. There was a long pause. Then she said something that made my jaw tighten. "I am sorry, sir, but those records are currently being updated. They are unavailable for public access at this time." I asked when they would be available. Another pause. "I cannot give you a specific date. You can check back in a few weeks." I thanked her and hung up. But I did not believe a word of it. Records do not disappear for weeks without reason. Someone had made them unavailable. Someone with connections. That evening, Jesse Perez came walking up my driveway, 70 years old, stooped and weathered, but his eyes were still sharp as glass. His property bordered mine on the north side, one of the last original homesteads in the area. He had been friends with my father since before I was born. I offered him a beer, and we sat on the porch watching the shadows stretch across the fields. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Jesse cleared his throat and looked at me with something I had never seen on his face before. Fear. "Robert, your father knew," he said quietly, "about Bradley, about what he was planning for this land, even back then, when the development first went up." Jesse glanced around like someone might be listening from the darkness. "There are papers, documents he kept hidden. He told me once that if anyone ever tried to take this property, the proof was in his safe. He made me promise not to say anything unless it became necessary." Jesse's hands trembled around his beer bottle. He was not a man who scared easily. Whatever he knew, it had been weighing on him for years. "I think it is necessary now," he said. "Whatever is in that safe. Your father left it for a moment exactly like this one." I asked what kind of documents. Jesse shook his head. He never showed me the details, just said the truth was there, waiting. He stood up slowly, leaving his beer unfinished on the railing. "Be careful, Robert. Bradley has connections everywhere. County, lawyers, maybe law enforcement. Do not underestimate him." Then he walked back down the driveway into the darkness, and I was alone with the weight of what he had told me. I sat on that porch for another hour, turning the pieces over in my mind. The fake violations, the inaccessible records, the moved boundary stake, Jesse's warning. None of it was random. Bradley Harmon had been building toward this for years, and my father had seen it coming before anyone else. The question was whether he had left me enough to fight back. I thought about the safe in the basement. I had not opened it since the day he died. There had been no reason to. His will was handled by a lawyer. His accounts were straightforward. I had assumed the safe held nothing but old papers and memories I was not ready to face. Now I understand. It held something else entirely. I went inside and stood at the top of the basement stairs for a long moment. My frustration had burned down to something colder, something steadier. This was not just about money or property anymore. This was about whether a man could still stand on his own land and tell the truth without being crushed by people with deeper pockets and dirtier hands. Bradley Harmon thought he could take what my family had built over 3 generations. He thought paperwork and connections would be enough to break me. He was wrong. Somewhere in that basement was the weapon I needed. Not a shotgun this time. Something that could not be confiscated or questioned or dismissed. The truth. And tomorrow morning, I was going to find it. The basement stairs creaked under my weight the same way they had for 40 years. Nothing down here had changed since my father's time. Workbench against the far wall, tools hanging in the same order he had arranged them. Shelves lined with paint cans and jars of screws sorted by size. And in the corner, behind a stack of boxes I had never moved, the safe. It was old, heavy, and fireproof, the kind they stopped making decades ago. My father had bought it second-hand in 1968, the year my mother told him they were expecting me. He said a man with a family needed a place to keep what mattered. I had not opened it since the morning after his funeral, when I retrieved his will and a few documents the lawyer needed. Whatever else was inside, I had left untouched. Some grief you are not ready to face. Some doors you keep closed until you have no choice. The combination was my mother's birthday. 4 numbers I would never forget. The lock resisted for a moment, then clicked. I pulled the heavy door open, and the smell hit me first. Old paper, dust, time. The top shelf held what I expected. Insurance policies are long expired. My parents' marriage certificate in a plastic sleeve. A stack of letters tied with a string that I recognized as my mother's handwriting. I set those aside carefully, promising myself I would read them someday when the wound was not so fresh. The bottom shelf held a metal box, the kind used for storing important documents. I pulled it out and carried it to the workbench under the single hanging bulb. Inside the box, everything was organized with the precision I remembered from my father. On top, a folder labeled Property in his careful block letters. I opened it and found the original deed from 1962, yellowed but perfectly legible. The legal description matched what I already knew. 5 acres, boundaries clearly marked, conveyed to William Robert Cook, my grandfather, by warranty deed with full title. Beneath the deed was the original plat map, hand-drawn by the county surveyor and stamped with an official seal. The boundary lines were exactly where my father's iron stakes still stood, or where they should have stood, before someone decided to move them, but it was the third document that stopped my breath. A manila envelope, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. My father's handwriting across the front, Annexation Agreement, keep safe. I slit the tape carefully with my pocket knife and pulled out a sheaf of papers held together with a rusted paperclip. The cover page was dated September 14th, 1998. The title read, Annexation and Development Agreement between Travis County and Oak Ridge Estates Development Corporation. I remembered that year. The bulldozers had come in the spring, clearing the land to the south of our property. My father had watched from this very porch, saying nothing. His jaw set in that way that meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. I turned to the section marked with a faded sticky note. Section 7, Clause 3. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the meaning was unmistakable. The following parcels are hereby excluded from the jurisdiction of any homeowners association established within the Oak Ridge Estates development. In perpetuity, and without possibility of future amendment, Parcel 227A, commonly known as the Cook family homestead, comprising 5 acres as described in Deed Book 1147, page 332. Below the clause were signatures. 3 county commissioners, the county clerk, a notary stamped and dated the same day. This was not a suggestion or a gentleman's agreement. This was the law. Binding. Permanent. The HOA had no authority over my land. They never had. And Bradley Harmon knew it. I photographed every page with my phone, then scanned them using the old printer in the corner that still somehow functioned. I needed copies in multiple locations. Digital backups. Physical duplicates are stored somewhere off this property. If these documents disappeared, I would have nothing. I worked methodically, the way my father had taught me, the way the military had reinforced. Secure your evidence before anything else. By midnight, I had copies stored on 2 separate cloud services, a USB drive hidden in my truck, and another set of prints locked in a safe deposit box at the bank in town. Only then did I allow myself to sit down and think about what came next. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Natalie Reed. A buddy from my old unit had used her for a boundary dispute 2 years back and said she was sharp, thorough, and did not scare easily. I needed all 3. She answered on the second ring and listened without interruption as I explained the situation. When I finished, there was a pause. Mr. Cook, can you send me those documents right now, all of them? Deed, plat map, and especially the annexation agreement. I had already attached them to an email before I dialed. I hit send and heard her computer chime on the other end. For several minutes, the only sound was her scrolling through pages. This is significant, she said finally. If this annexation agreement is authentic and still on file with the county, the HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction over your property. Every fine they have assessed is void, Every demand they have made is legally meaningless. I asked her about the county records being unavailable. Another pause, longer this time. That is concerning. These documents should be public record. The fact that someone has made them inaccessible suggests they know exactly what is in them and do not want anyone else to find out. I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I first saw Bradley Harmon's face. Why go through all this trouble for 5 acres? Natalie was quiet for a moment. I will need to do some research, Mr. Cook, but in my experience, when developers fight this hard for a specific piece of land, it is because that land is worth far more than anyone realizes. There is money behind this, serious money, and someone has decided your property is standing in the way of it. She promised to call me back within 48 hours after verifying the documents with the county archives. I thanked her and hung up. Then I walked outside and stood at the edge of my property, looking south toward Oak Ridge Estates, somewhere in those manicured houses and pristine lawns. Bradley Harmon was planning his next move. He thought he held all the cards. He did not know I had just found the ace my father had hidden 25 years ago. 1 week. That was how long it took for Bradley Harmon to make his next move. I had been expecting something, but not this. Not the county sheriff's cruiser pulling into my driveway at 7 in the morning. Lights off, but engine running. Like whoever was inside wanted to make a statement without making a scene. I watched from the kitchen window as a deputy stepped out. Young, early 40s, maybe. Built like someone who had played football in high school and never quite stopped working out. His name tag read Martinez. He walked toward my porch slowly, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a clipboard. This was not a social call. I met him at the door before he could knock. No point in making him wait. No point in making myself look like I had something to hide. "Deputy Martinez," I said, "what can I do for you?" He looked at me for a moment, sizing me up the way lawmen do when they are trying to decide if someone is going to be cooperative or difficult. Whatever he saw, it seemed to satisfy him. He relaxed slightly, but did not smile. "Mr. Cook, I have received a formal complaint regarding firearm safety at this residence. I am required to inspect to ensure all weapons are properly stored and legally registered." I nodded once and stepped aside. "Come in. I will show you everything you need to see." The inspection took 15 minutes. I showed him the shotgun, still mounted above the fireplace where it had hung for 3 generations. I presented my registration, my purchase records, my concealed carry permit. Everything was current. Everything was legal. Everything was exactly where Texas law said it should be. Deputy Martinez checked each document carefully, photographed the serial numbers, and examined the gun safe in my bedroom, where I kept my other firearms. When he finished, he handed back my paperwork and closed his clipboard. "Everything is in order. Mr. Cook, no violations, no concerns." I asked him who had filed the complaint. He hesitated, glancing toward the window like he was checking if anyone was watching. "The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, signed by the board president. Bradley Harmon, of course." I thanked the deputy for his professionalism and walked him back to his cruiser. Before he got in, he paused with his hand on the door. He looked back at me with something between sympathy and warning. "Mr. Cook, I have been doing this job for 16 years. I know the difference between a concerned citizen and someone using the system as a weapon." He lowered his voice. "Whatever is going on between you and that HOA, they are not going to stop. I have seen the paperwork they have been filing. Complaints, welfare check requests, and noise violations that do not exist. I do not know where this is headed, but I thought you should know what you are dealing with." I thanked him again, meaning it. He nodded once and drove away. The online attacks started that same afternoon. A friend from town called to tell me that someone named Donna Wood had posted a long statement on the community forum used by Oak Ridge residents. She described me as a dangerous recluse, a mentally unstable veteran who had threatened innocent surveyors with a loaded weapon, a threat to public safety. The post had 63 comments within 4 hours. Most of them were from people I had never met, echoing her accusations, demanding the county take action. A few voices tried to ask for evidence, but they were drowned out. Facts did not matter. Bradley Harmon had turned the narrative, and I was now the villain in a story I had never agreed to tell. I did not respond, did not comment, did not call anyone to argue my side. Engaging with a mob only gives them more ammunition. Instead, I drove to the electronics store in town and bought 4 weatherproof security cameras with night vision and motion activation. The clerk asked if I was worried about break-ins. I told him I was worried about something worse. I spent the rest of the afternoon installing them at strategic points around my property. One facing the driveway, one covering the southwest corner, where the boundary stake had been moved, one mounted under the porch eaves with a clear view of anyone approaching the house, and one hidden in the old oak tree at the back of the property, angled toward the fence line where my land met Oak Ridge Estates. If anyone set foot on my property again, I would have their face, their timestamp, and their evidence delivered straight to my phone. That night, I sat on the porch with the shotgun across my knees and watched the darkness settle over the fields. The air smelled like rain coming. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. I understood the strategy now. Make me look dangerous. Make the community fear me. Then whatever they did next would look like self-defense instead of theft. It was the oldest trick in the book, and they were executing it with precision. At 2:17 in the morning. My phone buzzed. Motion alert from the southwest camera. I pulled up the feed and watched as 2 figures climbed over my fence, moving quickly and quietly toward the boundary markers. They wore dark clothes and carried tools. They were back to finish what they had started. I recorded every second. One of the men turned toward the camera for just a moment, his face illuminated by the moonlight. I recognized him immediately. The surveyor from that first morning. I saved the footage to 3 separate locations before they even finished their work and disappeared back over the fence. Then I called Natalie Reed and left a message. I have them on video, moving my boundary markers, trespassing at 2 in the morning. Call me back as soon as you can. It is time to go on offense. Natalie Reed called back at 7:14 the next morning. I had been awake since 5. Reviewing the footage frame by frame, making sure the faces were clear enough to identify. They were. The surveyor's face was unmistakable, captured in sharp detail when the moonlight hit him at just the right angle. His companion kept his head down most of the time, but there were enough frames to work with. Natalie's voice was sharp and focused, the way it always got when she had something significant to report. I verified your documents with the county archives yesterday, she said. The annexation agreement is authentic and legally binding. Bradley Harmon has 0 authority over your land. Never did. I told her about the video. 2 men on my property at 2 in the morning, tools in hand, moving boundary markers. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from professional to something closer to controlled anger. That is criminal trespassing, possibly felony tampering with survey markers under Texas law. Mr. Cook, I need you to send me that footage immediately. Do not post it anywhere. Do not share it with neighbors or friends. Do not mention it to anyone outside of law enforcement. We are going to use this strategically, and timing matters. I had already attached the files to an email before she finished talking. I hit send and heard her computer chime on the other end. She received them within seconds and went silent as she watched. I could hear the video playing faintly through the phone, the rustle of grass, and the quiet footsteps of men who thought no one was watching. When it finished, she exhaled slowly. This is exactly what we needed. Clear faces, clear timestamps, clear criminal activity on your property. But I want to show you something else before we decide on next steps." I heard her typing rapidly, pulling up files. "I have been doing some research into Bradley Harmon's business dealings. Oak Ridge Estates Development Corporation filed permits 6 months ago for something called the Phase 2. Major expansion, retail space, additional housing units, a community center. The projected value is somewhere north of $12 million. She paused to let that number settle. "Do you want to guess where Phase 2 is supposed to be built?" I did not need to guess. "My property." "Your property," she confirmed. "The plans show the development extending directly onto your 5 acres. Without your land, the entire project falls apart. The financing is already in place. Investors are committed. Bradley Harmon has spent years positioning this deal, and your refusal to sell is the only thing standing between him and a fortune." I thought about the moved boundary stakes, the fake violations. The $100,000 fine was designed to drown me in legal fees. The smear campaign paints me as a dangerous lunatic. None of it was random. None of it was about HOA compliance. It was about $12 million, and a man who had decided my land belonged to him long before he ever knocked on my door. Natalie continued, her voice steady and methodical. "Here is what I recommend. We file criminal complaints with the county sheriff for trespassing and tampering. We attach the video evidence and request a formal investigation. Simultaneously, we file a separate complaint with the county commissioners alleging harassment and abuse of HOA authority. We request a public hearing to present our evidence and force the county to reaffirm the boundaries established in the annexation agreement." I asked how long the process would take. "I can have the paperwork ready by the end of the day. The sheriff's complaint will trigger an investigation so immediately. The county commissioners meet in 12 days. I can get us on the agenda if we move fast." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. Mr. Cook, once we file, there is no going back. Bradley will know we have evidence. He will know we are coming for him. Cornered men do unpredictable things. I told her to do it. All of it." I was done waiting. The next 48 hours were a blur of documents, signatures, and phone calls. Natalie filed the criminal complaint on Tuesday morning with the county sheriff's office. By Tuesday afternoon, an investigation was officially open. The video was logged as evidence, and the trespassers were identified as employees of Harmon Development Group. I was interviewed by a detective named Garza, who took careful notes and asked questions that told me he already suspected what we were dealing with. He wanted to know about every interaction I had with Bradley Harmon, every letter from the HOA, every incident that might establish a pattern. I gave him everything. When we finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Cook, I cannot make any promises about where this goes, but I have seen enough to know this is not a simple neighbor dispute." That was all he said. It was enough. Wednesday morning, Natalie submitted our formal request to the county commissioners. The packet included the original deed, the annexation agreement with Section 7 highlighted, the video evidence of the trespassers, and the Phase 2 development plans showing exactly why Bradley needed my land. She also included a written statement from me detailing the harassment campaign from day one. The hearing was scheduled for 12 days out. Plenty of time for Bradley to panic. Plenty of time for him to make another mistake. I spent Thursday reinforcing my position. Copies of every document are stored in multiple secure locations. Cloud backups updated and verified. Security cameras were tested and repositioned for better coverage. I was not paranoid. I was thorough. There is a difference. Jesse Perez came by in the late afternoon, walking slowly up the driveway the way he always did, like a man who had learned patience from decades of working the land. I invited him onto the porch and showed him the video on my phone. I watched his face go pale as he recognized the man in the footage. That is Frank Del Vecchio, he said quietly, pointing at the surveyor. He has worked for Bradley for 15 years, started as a foreman, worked his way up. Now he handles the jobs Bradley cannot afford to have traced back to him. Jesse looked at me with something between admiration and fear. If Frank is doing dirty work at 2 a.m, then Bradley is running out of options. This goes all the way to the top. Robert, all the way. I told Jesse that was exactly what I was counting on. Friday evening. I sat on the porch as the sun went down behind the tree line. The air was warm and still, heavy with the smell of cut grass and distant rain. The cameras were recording. The complaints were filed. The hearing was scheduled. For the first time since Bradley Harmon had stepped onto my property with that smug smile. I was not reacting to his moves. I was forcing him to react to mine. Natalie had warned me to expect some kind of response before the hearing. Cornered men do desperate things, she had said. I told her I was ready. I had my evidence, I had my lawyer, and I had my grandfather's shotgun, still hanging above the fireplace where it had hung for 3 generations, still unfired in anger. I hoped it would stay that way, but I was beginning to wonder if Bradley Harmon would give me a reason to take it down again. The answer came 3 days later, in the middle of the night, when headlights swept across my windows, and a car I recognized pulled slowly into my driveway. The headlights cut through my living room like a warning. I was already awake, sitting in the dark with a glass of water I had not touched, running through scenarios in my head. 3 days until the county commissioner's hearing. 3 days until everything I had gathered would be laid out in public. I had been expecting something. Bradley Harmon was not the kind of man who waited quietly while his empire crumbled. But I had not expected him to come here himself. Not alone. Not in the middle of the night. The car that pulled into my driveway was a black Mercedes, the same one I had seen parked outside the HOA office the day this all started. The engine cut off. The headlights died. And Bradley Harmon stepped out into the darkness like a man who still believed he owned everything he could see. I rose from the chair slowly and walked to the fireplace. My grandfather's shotgun hung where it had always hung. I lifted it down and stepped onto the porch, letting the screen door close behind me. On my property, with a legal weapon, I had every right to stand exactly where I was standing. Bradley was halfway up the driveway, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes dropped to the shotgun, then rose to meet mine. The porch camera's red light blinked steadily in my peripheral vision. Whatever happened next, there would be a record. "Mr. Cook," he said finally. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had practiced sounding reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I am here to make things right." I did not lower the shotgun, did not raise it either. "It is almost midnight. Mr. Harmon, whatever you have to say could have been said through lawyers during business hours." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Lawyers complicate things. I prefer to handle important matters personally." He took another step forward. I did not move. "I know about the hearing," Bradley said. "I know what you are planning to present. The annexation agreement, the survey footage, all of it. I also know that hearings can be unpredictable. Evidence gets challenged. Witnesses change their stories. Commissioners have pressures you and I cannot see. There is no guarantee you will win, Mr. Cook, even with everything you have." I waited. He was building to something. Men like Bradley always did. "I am prepared to offer you $200,000 for your property," he said. "Cash, clean, no contingencies. That is double what this land is worth on the open market. You could walk away tomorrow and never think about Oak Ridge Estates again." The number hung in the air between us. $200,000. It was a generous offer, and we both knew it. It was also a confession. You do not pay double market value for land you have a legal right to take. You only pay that much when you are afraid of what happens if you do not. This land is not for sale, I said. It was not for sale when you sent your surveyors. It was not for sale when you sent your fake fines. It is not for sale now. Bradley's smile flickered. Something darker passed behind his eyes. Then the mask came back, smoother than before. Mr. Cook, I am trying to help you. The hearing is not going to go the way you think. I have relationships with people on that commission. Relationships that go back years. Even if your documents are legitimate, there are ways to delay, to appeal, to tie this up in courts for a decade. You will spend every penny you have fighting a battle you cannot win. I let his words settle into the silence. Then I spoke slowly, so there would be no misunderstanding. My father worked this land for 50 years. 3 generations of my family are buried at the edge of that tree line. I gestured toward the darkness beyond the house. You think $200,000 can buy that? You do not understand anything. Mr. Harmon, this is not about money. It never was. Bradley's expression hardened. The mask slipped, and I saw what was underneath. Not a businessman, not a developer, just a man who had always gotten what he wanted and could not comprehend someone telling him no. You are making a mistake, he said. His voice had dropped, the smooth charm replaced by something cold and flat. I have buried better men than you. Cook, men with more money, more connections, more fight. You think your little videos and your lawyer are going to protect you. He took a step closer, close enough that I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. I will take everything you have. By the time I am finished. No one will remember your family ever lived here. I stood motionless on that porch and let him finish. Let him empty himself of every threat he had been saving. When he finally stopped, breathing hard. I waited 3 full seconds before I responded. Are you done? He stared at me, caught off guard by the calm in my voice. Because if you are done, then I need you to get off my property. You are trespassing. Mr. Harmon, again. And this time, you have done it on camera, with audio, threatening a homeowner on his own land. My lawyer is going to have a very productive morning. Something shifted in his face, the realization that he had lost control, that he had walked into a trap of his own making. He opened his mouth to say something else, then thought better of it, without another word. He turned and walked back to his Mercedes. The engine started, the headlights flared, and then he was gone. Tail lights disappearing down the road toward Oak Ridge Estates. I stood on the porch until I could no longer hear the engine. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the security app, and confirmed the footage was saved. His face, his offer, his threats, everything preserved. I called Natalie Reed and left a message. He came to my house, made an offer, then made threats. I have all of it on video. Call me when you wake up. The hearing just got a lot more interesting. I hung up and looked out at the darkness where Bradley's car had vanished. 3 days. In 3 days, this would all be over. One way or another. The truth was going to come out, and Bradley Harmon was going to learn what my father had taught me a long time ago. You do not win by being louder or richer. You win by being right, and by being patient enough to prove it. The county commissioner's chamber smelled like old wood and fresh anxiety. I arrived 45 minutes early and took a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see faces, but far enough to watch the entire room. Natalie Reed sat beside me with a leather briefcase containing everything we had gathered over the past weeks. She was calm, composed, reviewing her notes one final time. I had worn my only suit, the one I kept for funerals and occasions that demanded respect. This was both. Jesse Perez arrived 20 minutes later and sat directly behind me. He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once without saying anything. The gesture said enough. The room filled gradually. Residents from Oak Ridge Estates filtered in, some curious, some hostile. I recognized a few faces from the online posts that had called me dangerous, unstable, a threat to their community. They avoided my eyes. Easier to hate someone you have never actually looked at. Local reporters set up in the back corner, 2 cameras and a woman with a notepad who kept glancing at Bradley Harmon's empty seat in the front row. The seat remained empty until 3 minutes before the hearing began. Then Bradley walked in with Donna Wood and 2 men in expensive suits who carried themselves like lawyers accustomed to winning. He did not look at me, did not acknowledge my existence, just sat down and whispered something to his legal team that made them nod in unison. The 5 county commissioners took their seats at the elevated bench. The chairman, a heavy-set man in his 60s named Richardson, called the room to order and worked through preliminary business with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Budget amendments, road maintenance contracts, a zoning variance for a gas station on the east side of town. Then he shuffled his papers and looked up. Next item on the agenda, a formal complaint filed by Mr. Robert Cook regarding harassment, trespassing, and abuse of authority by the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Mr. Cook, you and your counsel may approach. Natalie and I walked to the front of the room. She set up a laptop connected to the chamber's display screen while I stood at the podium, facing the commissioners and the audience behind them. I could feel Bradley's eyes on me now. The weight of his attention was like a physical pressure against my back. Natalie nodded once. I began. Commissioners, my name is Robert Cook. My family has owned the property at 4727 Rural Route 12 since 1962. 3 generations have lived and worked on that land. I am here today because the Oak Ridge Estates, HOA, under the leadership of Bradley Harmon, has spent the past 2 months trying to take it from me through harassment, fraud, and criminal activity. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richardson raised a hand for silence. Natalie took over, her voice clear and precise. We will present 3 categories of evidence. First, documentation establishing that Mr. Cook's property was explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction. Second, video evidence of criminal trespassing and tampering with survey markers. Third, recorded footage of Mr. Harmon personally threatening Mr. Cook on his own property. She clicked the laptop, and the annexation agreement appeared on the screen. Section 7, Clause 3, highlighted in yellow. This agreement, signed by county commissioners in 1998, permanently excludes Mr. Cook's parcel from any HOA authority. The document is on file in your own archives. It has never been amended or revoked. One of the commissioners, a younger woman named Torres, leaned forward. Ms. Reed, are you saying the HOA had no legal basis for any enforcement actions against Mr. Cook? Natalie nodded. That is exactly what I am saying. Every fine, every violation notice, every demand issued by Oak Ridge Estates HOA was legally meaningless. They had no jurisdiction. They knew they had no jurisdiction, and they proceeded anyway. Bradley's lawyer stood up. Objection. This is a civil matter, not a criminal proceeding. The complainant is making accusations without— Richardson cut him off. This is not a courtroom. Counselor, sit down and let them finish. You will have your opportunity to respond. The lawyer sat, his face tight with controlled anger. Bradley remained motionless, but I could see his jaw working, grinding teeth behind closed lips. Natalie played the first video, the footage from my Southwest camera, time-stamped at 2:17 in the morning. 2 figures are climbing my fence, moving boundary markers, their faces clearly visible in the moonlight. These men have been identified as employees of Harmon Development Group, Natalie said. They were trespassing on Mr. Cook's property and tampering with legally established survey markers. This is a felony under Texas law. The room went silent. On the screen, the surveyor I had confronted that first morning turned toward the camera, his face frozen in high definition. undeniable. Then Natalie played the second video. Bradley Harmon was standing in my driveway 3 nights ago. His voice filled the chamber. Clear and damning. The $200,000 offer. The threats about commissioners and connections. And then the words that made the room gasp. "I will take everything you have. By the time I am finished, no one will remember your family ever lived here." The recording ended. Bradley's face on the screen was frozen mid-sentence, his expression twisted with rage. The Bradley sitting in the front row looked like a man watching his own autopsy. Richardson turned to Bradley. "Mr. Harmon, would you like to respond?" Bradley stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might try to explain, to spin, to deploy whatever charm had carried him this far. Instead, something broke. "This is a setup," he said, his voice rising. "Cook has been planning this from the beginning. He is the one who should be investigated. That land belongs to this community. It has always belonged to this community. My family built Oak Ridge Estates. We created value where there was nothing. And this man, this stubborn old fool with his shotgun and his delusions, thinks he can stand in the way of progress." His lawyers tried to quiet him. He shook them off. I offered him twice what that dirt is worth. Twice, and he refused because he would rather see this development fail than accept a reasonable deal. He is the villain here, not me. The room erupted. Richardson banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Commissioner Torres spoke into the silence that followed. "Mr. Harmon, nothing you just said addresses the evidence presented. The annexation agreement is clear. The video footage is clear. Your own words on that recording are clear." She looked at her fellow commissioners. "I move that we formally reaffirm the boundaries established in the 1998 agreement and refer this matter to the district attorney for investigation of potential fraud, extortion, and criminal trespassing." The motion passed unanimously. Deputy Mason Martinez, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, walked forward. He stopped beside Bradley Harmon's seat. "Mr. Harmon, I need you to come with me. We have some questions regarding the evidence presented today." Bradley looked around the room, searching for an ally, an escape, anything. He found nothing. Donna Wood was already edging toward the exit. His lawyers were packing their briefcases with the urgency of men who wanted to be elsewhere. Bradley stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out with Deputy Martinez without another word. I remained at the podium, watching him go. Jesse Perez caught my eye from the third row and nodded slowly. Natalie put a hand on my arm. "It is over. Mr. Cook, you won." I shook my head. "It is not over yet. But it is close." 6 weeks later, the wheels of justice delivered their verdict. Bradley Harmon was convicted on 4 counts: extortion, fraud, criminal trespassing, and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison and a $75,000 fine. Donna Wood pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 2 years probation with a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in Texas. She moved out of state before the ink was dry. The Phase 2 development died with Bradley's conviction. Investors pulled out. Permits expired. The empty lots south of Oak Ridge sat untouched, slowly returning to wildflowers. The new HOA board sent me a formal apology and a check for $15,000 to cover legal expenses. I deposited it without ceremony. Some victories do not require celebration. They only require acknowledgement. On the first Saturday of November, I hired a licensed surveyor to restore my boundary markers. They worked all morning, driving new iron stakes into the exact positions my father had established in 1971. Bright orange paint on top, visible for years to come. When they finished, I signed the official survey document and walked the property line alone, touching each marker like a man confirming that something precious had been returned. Jesse Perez found me at the southwest corner that afternoon. He carried 2 beers and handed me one without a word. We stood together watching shadows stretch across the field shades, the comfortable silence of men who have known each other long enough not to need conversation. Finally, Jesse spoke. "Your father would be proud. Robert, he always said you had backbone." He looked toward the house, toward the porch where this had all begun. "Can I ask you something? All those confrontations with Bradley, did you ever think about using it? The shotgun." I considered the question. It deserved honesty. I thought about it. There were moments when pulling the trigger would have felt justified. But that was never why my grandfather carried that weapon. It was never about shooting anyone. It was about standing your ground, about letting people know you will not be moved. I finished my beer. I did not need to fire a single shot. The truth did the work for me. Jesse smiled. "Just like your old man." That evening, I sat alone on the porch as the sun dropped below the tree line. The shotgun still hung above the fireplace inside, polished wood and cold steel, unfired in anger. It would probably hang there until I was gone, carrying the same meaning it had carried for 3 generations. A reminder that some things are worth protecting without violence. Only conviction. My father's voice echoed in my memory, clear as the day he first said it. Never let anyone move the boundary. Once you lose the line, you lose everything. I had kept the line. I had held the ground. The boundaries were restored. The truth was public record. And I was still here, exactly where I intended to stay.